Hey, I'm getting ready to read the next chapter of Trouble According to Humphrey. It's chapter 10, The Difficulty with Dr. Drew. It turns out I was confused. A vegetarian eats only vegetables. A veterinarian is an animal doctor, not a doctor who is an animal, but a human doctor who takes care of animals like dogs, cats, horses, and hamsters. Sick hamsters. Mr. Brisbane was right. I hadn't been eating much lately, but it wasn't because I was sick. It was because I felt so guilty about Miranda. Could a veterinarian, Mr. Brisbane called it a vet, figure that out? I didn't think so. It was quiet in the Brisbane's house for most of the day. Mr. Brisbane spent a lot of time in his workshop making things out of wood, like birdhouses and picture frames. Olive was unusually quiet, even for him. There were no giggling students or recess bells or spelling tests to keep me awake. I finally crawled into my sleeping hut, but I didn't actually fall asleep. I kept picturing my friends hard at work on Humphreyville. Or since I was in so much trouble, maybe they changed the name. Somehow, Ogberg didn't sound very good to me. Time dragged on until Miss Brisbane finally came home. How are the guys? She asked her husband. Fine, fine, although Humphrey is quieter than usual. Did you get my message about the vet? Yes, I telephoned Miss Payne to tell her we're getting Humphrey examined this afternoon. In fact, I invited her to come along. Cool. I was going to the vet's office that same afternoon with Mrs. Payne. What did she say? She goes to work at 4 o'clock, Mrs. Brisbane checked her watch, which reminds me, we better get going if we're going to make it there by 4:30. 4:30? It was close to 4:30 already. I only had time to squeak, wish me luck, dog, before my cage was covered. I was whisked out the door with the Brisbanes. As long as I'd been in room 26, I'd worried about the problems of my classmates. Now I was in trouble, big trouble myself, and my friends didn't even know about it. I was glad my cage was covered because the air was freezing cold, but traveling that way is like being blindfolded. By the time I could see what was going on around me, I was in the waiting room of the veterinarian's office. Dr. Drew will see Humphrey in a few minutes, the man behind the desk told us. I had a few minutes to look around and I was shocked, shocked, shocked. To the right of me was a large white dog with brown freckles and huge teeth, like Miranda's unfriendly dog, Clem. He licked his chops. That meant he was hungry. I quickly turned my head. To the left of me was a cage with a cat in it. The cat had black fur and white paws. Its dark green eyes were staring right at me, a little too hard for my own comfort. I decided to look straight ahead, where there was a huge tank with fish of every color. Some had stripes and even polka dots, and they swam around and round a pink castle. I wished I could be behind glass instead of sitting so close to those two dangerous creatures. Those few minutes the man at the desk had mentioned seemed like a few hours to me. Then something shocking happened. The door swung open, and in walked Mr. Payne, followed by Mandy, Pammy, Tammy, and Brian. Mrs. Brisbane was as stunned as I was. Mandy, what are you doing here? Mandy looked as if she wanted to be anywhere but in that office. Miss Brisbane gained control of herself and put her hand out to Mr. Payne. Hello, Mr. Payne. This is a surprise. She introduced the Paynes to Mr. Brisbane, and everyone said hello. I must say, Mr. Payne didn't seem very happy to be there. Mandy acted even unhappier. I didn't know if that was because of me or because of her red nose. Pammy and Tammy were too busy kicking each other to notice where they were, while Brian tore pages out of the magazine. The wife said I should come and see what the doc says. Mr. Payne was extremely glum. If that's okay with you. Mrs. Brisbane politely said it was fine with her, but it didn't seem fine to me. Mandy's mom didn't trust Miss Brisbane to tell her honestly what the doctor said. That ruffled my fur a bit. Now see here, Mr. Payne, I squeaked, which wasn't such a good idea. When they heard me, the dog and the cat got excited, barking and snarling and growling and meowing in a very unnecessary way. I only hope they wouldn't discover that my cage had a lock that doesn't unlock. Just as I was about to escape into my sleeping hut for safety, a woman dressed all in pale green entered. She had dark skin, dark hair, and big dark eyes like Miss Mack, my first teacher. Hi, I'm Dr. Melissa Drew. Is Humphrey all set? I was all set to get out of that waiting room, I can tell you that. Miss Brisbane stepped forward and introduced herself to the vet. It was decided that Mandy and her sisters and brothers would stay in the waiting room while the adults came into the examination room with me. It was nice and warm inside, so why was I quivering and shaking and shivering? Dr. Drew put my cage on a padded table and smiled at me. Now, Humphrey, is this your first exam? Yes, 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 I squeaked loudly, which made Dr. Drew smile even more. He certainly sounds healthy, she said as she opened my cage, reached in and took me out. Don't worry, Humphrey, this won't hurt a bit. Dr. Drew spoke to the humans. This isn't any different than the kind of examinations you get. Has Humphrey had any problems lately? He's pretty peppy, but he hasn't been eating as much as usual, said Mrs. Brisbane. Made all my kids sick, said Mr. Payne. Dr. Drew was surprised. Really? Yep, he spent the weekend at our house and all my kids got sick. Some of the other kids at school, too, right? He turned to Miss Brisbane. Everyone who's been sick seems to have a code, even children who didn't take Humphrey home. Mrs. Brisbane said firmly. It's highly unusual for humans to get sick from handling a hamster. It's more common for a hamster to pick up disease from a human or another animal. But let's check him out. Dr. Drew's touch was gentle. I relaxed. She put one hand underneath me and held her other hand above my head, making a little tent for me. Very, very nice. We'll check his eyes first because that's where we usually see signs of infections in hamsters. Cupping me in one hand, she shined a tiny light directly in one eye. Whoa, that's a wake-up call. Next, she checked my other eye. Looking good, she said. No discharge or inflammation. Now listen to his heartbeat. Dr. Drew picked up the stethoscope, a word I do not want to see on a spelling test. It had a plug for each of her ears and a teeny piece that she held against my chest. First she listened, then she smiled. Excellent. A very healthy heart, Humphrey. Now let's check out that weight. She set me on a scale that was flat and square. She also put a few chunks of nibbles on the scale. Those will keep him there for a second. She let go of me, and while I picked up a treat, she said, well, even if he's not been eating well, his weight is completely normal. While I nibbled away, Dr. Drew and Miss Brisbane discussed what I ate. He usually eats everything, vegetables, fruit, hamster food, yogurt drops, Miss Brisbane said. Excellent, said the vet. Lots of variety. That's what hamsters like, right, Humphrey? You bet, I squeaked, and the doctor chuckled. But I just found out some old food hidden in the but I just found out some old food hidden in his cage and realized he's not been eating as much as before, Mr. Brisbane said. Dr. Drew bit her lip for a second and then asked, has there been any change in his environment lately? Miss Brisbane nodded. Well, I had to take him out of the classroom because of the complaint. I most noticed Mr. Payne was staring at his shoes. So I guess things are a little upset for him, my teacher added. That could be it, said Dr. Drew. Some hamsters are very sensitive even to some changes. She was right about that. I am a very sensitive hamster, and Dr. Drew is a very good veterinarian. Sometimes hamsters get infections in their cheek pouches because they store food there. So open wide, Humphrey. She picked me up and gently pulled my mouth open, using the small light to look inside. Clean as a whistle, she said. Fur is nice and shiny. I'll take a sample of some stool if there's any in there. I was confused, but it turns out the stool is poo. She took some from my cage with the tweezers and put it in a tube. It's nice and firm, which is a good sign. What a surprise. Usually when my classmates clean my cage, they go, ew, or yuck, when they get to the poo part. But it didn't bother Doctor at all. She even had a nice name for it. Stool. The vet held me up to her eye level and said, Humphrey, we need to get you back to your old environment. But in the meantime, you are one healthy, handsome hamster. I remember when Miss Mac picked me out at Pet-O-Rama and told Carl, the store clerk, he's obviously the most intelligent and handsome hamster you have. I sure miss Miss Mac, but she sent me postcards, so I knew she still cared. Dr. Drew cared too. She may not have been able to figure out that I felt guilty about Miranda, but she had figured out that I wasn't sick. We're going to stop right there for chapter 11, part 1.